How are you? Most people answer that question with fine or good. But obviously it's not always fine, and it's usually not even that good. This is a podcast that asks people to be honest about their pain. To just be honest about how they really feel. About the hard parts of life. And guess what? It's complicated. I'm Nora McInerny. And this is terrible. Thanks for asking.
I speak at public schools quite a bit, and I always hold off why I'm there. They don't know why I'm showing up. I'm there to talk about addiction, and then I'll share some of my own story. And then when I get to that point where I'm like, I was in this drinking and driving accident, 6 people died, that's where the room goes quiet, and people aren't used to hearing that sort of level of devastation.
You've probably seen a car wreck on the side of the road at some point. Cars crumpled into each other, EMTs and firefighters swarming around. They're horrible, but we always look. We want to know what happened. Maybe you've been in a wreck like this. Maybe you've lost someone in one. But you probably haven't been the person who caused it. But Robert is.
So there was a guy who was dying on the highway, and I just went over to him, and he was screaming, and I just said, "You've just been in a terrible accident." And then I just went over and sat on the side of the road, and I started holding my knees and rocking. It was about that time the police showed up and said, "Did you do this?" And I said, "Yeah, I guess I did."
Robert has spent years of his life since this accident bearing his darkest moments so that teenagers might avoid the depths of addiction that he faced, the choices he made because of that addiction, the consequences of those actions, some of which are so big they can never be righted. How does someone get back from that point? A point so low that so few people sink to, let alone come back from. And how did they get there?
I grew up in a house where there was always alcohol available. I wouldn't describe my father as having an alcohol use disorder, but he drank constantly, mostly beer. There was wine in the house. And my sister was religious, and I don't know if she's ever drank at all in her life. So I grew up as an 80s kid where drinking was very modeled. Like the shows we watched were Cheers and MASH. And in Cheers, it was like there was Cliff and Norm who went to the bar every day after work. And then MASH, they had a martini distillery in their tent, It's just a different time. I started probably drinking, like sneaking drinks, when I was between 12 and 14, around then. And I started, like many of the kids back then, smoking weed about the same time. Weed was probably easier to get than alcohol. I think that's probably still true because alcohol is so regulated. And for me, it wasn't like a thing of wanting to fit in so much. I just was genuinely curious about substances themselves. You hear all these things, and drink alcohol, it'll make you act goofy, and you'll lose all your sort of social filters. And if you smoke weed, you'll be like really laid back. And if you take hallucinogens, you can see things that aren't there. And so I wanted to do those things. I just wanted to know what that was like. I didn't understand how your brain could do that. I always thought of myself as doing sort of a chemical experiment with all of the above, and whatever was put in front of me. Throughout high school, when bad things would happen in my life, I had a friend who had been in a drinking and driving accident. He ran through a brick mailbox, and a brick split his head open. And he lived through that, but after that, he had the mental capacity of maybe a 2-year-old. And so when that happened, the way we handled that was not to discuss it. It was we got high at it. That's just what we did, That was my resource for when things go bad. This is what you do. This is how you handle life.
So that's how he handled life. And it didn't work all that well. In between high school and college, Robert ended up in court-mandated counseling for about a year after a drinking and driving accident. This was a new scene for him, sitting in a circle of a lot of older, tough guys who were bearing it all for their AA group.
They started talking about their fucking feelings. I was like, what is this? I'd never seen anything like that in my life. So I was like, whatever they're doing, I want to do that. But I didn't want to not drink. So I like the community. I like how open people were and how they talk about things so openly. Especially like older white men, you just didn't see that. I wanted whatever they had because it felt like I belonged in something. But they were like, they were talking about like beating up little old ladies with baseball bats, and I had never done any of that stuff. So I was 18, So I just felt like I didn't fit in. Then I started going to other Narcotics Anonymous meetings because they had a younger crowd. And I always joke, I'm like, well, the girls were better looking. That was why I went, Even there, I did that for maybe like in and out for like a year. So I guess I was like 19 or something, maybe 20. And then all my friends were going off to college and like partying. And I was like, I didn't have any like evidence that this was a problem other than like sometimes things went a little haywire. Most of my friends who were in college sort of said the same thing, right? They went off to school, they partied, and whoa, it got out of control. And now I reel it back in. So it's hard to see as a problem. I just thought maybe I'm just around the wrong people and I don't know where the right people are. So if I can go to this place, that'll solve it. I went to college and it was a party for all of 9 months maybe. And then I checked myself into a treatment center. And I had met a woman who I spent I think the next 9 years with, and had really started to mellow out. We had a wedding in like her grandmother's backyard, like little grassroots, very sweet, but we never signed a marriage certificate. In fact, we were very poor. We went to go downtown to get the marriage certificate, and both of us were like, there was a line. We had money in our pockets, so we're like, let's go to the bar, have a couple of drinks, and we just never got a marriage certificate. So we never got legally married. We were together for a few more years, and then one night, I think she had just reached a point where she's like, I've really had it, and she walked out, and I didn't even know there was a problem. I think we really cared about each other a lot. I think we grew up together. We were young when we met, and we were trying to put a life together. I think I probably, like looking back, wasn't very present for a lot of the marriage. I think my marriage today is very different. But we were good friends. There wasn't a lot of fighting. There wasn't like, we didn't argue a lot. We had very similar worldviews and even similar upbringing, So I think we were good friends. But my use was increasing and my dependence was increasing. And I think it was just really hard for me to be present in her life. And so I just ended up like losing. I was just high all the time. I ended up losing my job. My house was foreclosed on, so now I'm homeless. And then the only thing that's actually helping me feel okay is the drugs and the alcohol. So I'm not going to stop that. That wouldn't make any sense at all. And then I started having a lot of suicidal ideation, right? So then I wake up every morning, I'm sleeping on a friend's couch and then this friend's couch, and I'm driving around with a toothbrush in my car because I don't know where I'm going to be tomorrow. And so then I'm thinking like, I'm not sure that I can keep living at all. So I wake up every day with a suicidal ideation, and rather than kill myself, I drink. I get high. It helps me make it through the rest of the day.
Drugs and alcohol are how Robert gets through the pain of being alive. He's 32, and he's been through a series of big losses, including the death of a very close friend. He feels like he's coming undone, and even though it might not look like it, he is trying. He spends more time with family. He spends more time trying to get sober. Robert's substance abuse has a cycle to it, and part of that cycle is thinking that he's on sure footing, playing with the idea of sobriety and moderate alcohol consumption. But what is moderate alcohol consumption? Because, and people hate to hear this, there is no amount of alcohol that is actually healthy for you. It's just so well marketed. It's a part of American culture. Alcohol is American culture.
And how did you guys like the shots?
I drank all 5, bitch.
I love
Walk. I'm still sweating out Fireball. My hair smells like cigarettes. But if we don't keep going, at least on some level, we're gonna crash.
So relax, and I'm ready to party.
Can I get you something to drink?
Cosmopolitan? Cosmopolitan.
Who wants to play True American?
I'm in. That sounds like a great idea.
So it's 50% drinking game, 50% life-size Candyland.
Well, it's more like 75 drinking, 20 Candyland. And by the way, the floor is molten lava.
It's actually 90% drinking, and then it's got a loose Candyland-like structure to it.
Sometimes you wanna go where everybody knows your name.
Societally, there's nothing dissuading us from participating in the culture of alcohol. There's only the encouragement to participate and participate heavily. The CDC says that binge drinking constitutes having 5 or more alcoholic drinks on one occasion for a man and 4 or more drinks on one occasion for a woman. I don't know about you, but by those measures, I was binge drinking almost every time I consumed alcohol as a young adult and adult. There was 0 sense of moderation and 0 incentive for moderation. My friends and I just wanted to get drunk. And the more you drink and the more people you know who drink, the more normal all of this excessive, crazy drinking seems.
If you drink like I drink, Halloween's a great holiday, Halloween and New Year's Eve, because everybody looks like you do for the night. So you're not doing anything abnormal.
This, Halloween 2003, is the night that changes everything. Halloween of 2003 is the night that sets everything in motion. But it's the events of the following day that are forever etched in Robert's mind. Robert spent Halloween like he spent most of his days. He woke up hungover and smoked weed. He did his job assignments as a tile worker. And by the end of the day, he was drinking heavily with a group of bar friends, playing bluegrass music, and hopping around town. It's now November 1st.
I woke up that morning and I was just hungover. I was living with a friend named Tommy. He was a good guy. But he wasn't there. And I had a little dog named Gracie, who I named after Gracie Allen, George Burns' wife. And I just love that dog so much. And so I woke up and played with her and wrestled and played tug of war and all this stuff. But I was feeling sick because I was hungover, and I was pretty severely hungover because the day before was Halloween. So I think I was tired a lot in those days, a lot more tired than I am now, and maybe a little sad and a little lonely. And I went to the local, it was a sandwich shop, but it was a bar where we all hung out, and it was like 11 in the morning, and I was just trying to take it easy that day. And so I just had tried to order a cup of coffee, and they had run out of coffee, so I ordered a beer mostly to make the hangover go away. It was kind of a normal day for me. There was nothing that unusual about that day. I had gotten to a point where I didn't like people to know how much I was drinking, so I would not spend a lot of time at one bar or another. So I spent maybe a couple of hours there, and then went to another bar down the street and spent some time there and saw some friends there and hung out. And then another bar that evening, but I was just really genuinely just tired and wanted to go home. And I had been out late the night before. My hangover was mostly gone. I was feeling comfortably numb. I didn't feel intoxicated. I wouldn't say that I drove intoxicated frequently that night. I didn't think I was intoxicated. So I got into the van to go home. Highway 54 in Raleigh, North Carolina, behind the state fairgrounds. And so they T-boned into another car and somebody had been hurt. And some people heard that accident or saw that accident, and a bunch of people stopped to help. So some kids going to a college party, I think, they stop, they see this accident has happened, and they pull this guy out of the car. And another guy who's on a bicycle hears the accident, and he rides up. And it's not even late, I don't think. I think it was like around 8:15, 8:30. And I hop in the van, and I got to go home. It's only 3 miles to my house, so this is like textbook. Another couple, a football game had just let out at the local university, at NC State University. People were leaving that, and a couple had stopped with I think 2 of their 3 sons in the back of the car, and they pull over the side of the highway to help. So just a bunch of people stopped to help. And I'm driving home, and I took that highway because I knew there wouldn't be any police on it. It was a straight shot. I got to make one right turn, and then I went. And I came over a hill, and there's just a bunch of people in the middle of the road. So I didn't know what to do, so I slammed on the brakes, which didn't work because of anti-lock brakes kicking in. And then I looked across the highway, and I was like, I'll go across the highway. There wasn't anybody there. So I turned the wheel to try to head that way, which might have been the worst thing I could have done. It's been almost 20 years since that night, and I can still see their faces before I hit them. And I didn't even know that I had hit them. I didn't know what had happened. I was just I didn't understand why there were people in the road. So I just tried to go into the oncoming lane. And then I wasn't wearing a seatbelt, so I was thrown out of the car seat because the airbag had gone off. Car alarm was blaring. So I got out of the car. And then it was like such a confused scene. There were people screaming, and there were bodies, and there were people running, trying to help. And then a kid who had just watched both of his parents get killed said, "Who did this?" And so I started screaming, "Oh my God, I can't believe I've killed these people." And I wanted to help, but I didn't know what to do. So there was a guy who was dying on the highway, and I just went over to him, and he was screaming, and I just said, "You've just been in a terrible accident." And I just went over and sat on the side of the road, and I started holding my knees and rocking. It was about that time the police showed up and said, "Did you do this?" And I said, "Yeah, I guess I did." And so they put me in the car. It's one of those things your body doesn't know how to process. I think about this often with people do hit and runs, and we always think that's like the worst thing anybody can ever do. But I will say, I understand why people run. I didn't feel like, I got to get away from this. I'm going to be in so much trouble. It's more like something that's just buried deep down within us, that when you're encountering this much overwhelm and trauma, then we have to flee. We have to get out of there. And fortunately for me, legally, I froze rather than fled. I tried to go help somebody, but I didn't know what to do. They took me down to a local ATC center or something. And while I was in there, they said, "We have a warrant for your blood here. You can either fight us and we can strap you down at the table, or we can just take it." I said, "Well, I wasn't trying to be a dick. You can take my blood." I was told not to take a breathalyzer. So we had to wait for blood results to come back. And I figured I might be close to the legal limit, but I wasn't beyond it. And it turned out I was over twice the legal limit. But I just had such high tolerance, So at that point, when we were walking out of there to be taken to the local county jail, I heard on the television that an alleged drunk driver had just struck and killed, I think 6 and they might have even said 8 people or something like that. I ended up hitting 9 people altogether, and 6 of them died. But even then, I was like, no, I couldn't have done all that. Certainly, there was so much chaos, they just don't know what's happened yet or something. So they took me to the jail, and about that time, I think I just started, involuntary twitches and eye twitches and shakes, and they put me on suicide watch in the county jail. They just give you a suit made out of like a paper towel so you can't hang yourself, and the cell's made out of it's like a fish tank, everybody can see you, so they can see you go to the bathroom. Not that by that time everything's shutting down anyway, you don't have to go to the bathroom. Yeah, and that was it. And I didn't know, like, enough about the criminal justice system to know, like, what they do for anything like that. I'd never thought about prison or jails. Is that something you get a death penalty for? Is that something, do they put me in prison for the rest of my life for? I had no idea, And I think the very first time I really went, this is just definitely a problem, was maybe a few days later, it's all mashed up in my head still. But I was told by my family that bail had been set and they could bail me out of jail until the trial, but they were afraid to do that because they thought that if they did it, I might drink and get high or kill myself. And it was such a huge media event at the time that I was afraid that they might be right. And then, so I remember going, holy cow, I've been waiting like my whole life for things to get bad enough. I've been homeless twice. I'd lost every relationship. Now 6 people had been killed and it still wasn't bad enough. So there's not a bad enough. During my trial, many of the family members got up to say their piece. I had pled no contest, which is like guilty, I guess. The family members had all begged over and over, whatever you do, please don't drink again. Please don't use drugs. So that was done for me. It was just, for a while, I was like, I'm just going to try this as an experiment. I think I had this very visceral thing of like, I've been getting high more of my life than not, like what would happen if I just stopped doing that? This sounds so stupid to say. I think this a lot though, but back then I genuinely didn't see it as like putting other people at risk. I was putting my driver's license at risk. Eventually I'd get caught. Many of my friends had DWIs. It's going to be expensive and annoying, but so what? So I didn't see it as, oh, this could really harm somebody, because I've heard other people say the same thing. Oh, I think I'm a better driver under the influence. I don't think that was true for me, but I think what they're missing in that equation is that might be true. You might be able to pull it off all the time successfully as long as nothing happens. In this discovery, nobody was saying, oh, he was weaving. I wasn't speeding. I was just keeping it in between the lines. As long as nothing unusual happened, I would have been home probably safe and sound that night.
But 6 people are dead. An 18-year-old college freshman, a young father and his friend who had just gone to a college football game, a couple visiting from Charlotte, a man who lived nearby. All good Samaritans who had gotten out of their cars to help 2 people who had gotten into a fender bender on the highway. At the sentencing, when the families gave their victim impact statements, the parents of that college freshman offered to donate his remaining college money to Robert's drug and alcohol rehabilitation. Robert was sentenced to up to 12 years in prison. He served 9.
You can't even complain about that amount of time. They genuinely could have locked me up forever. Prison and jail, there's like a parallel process, right? So you're trying to wrap your head around this whole huge event thing that's happened, this person that you've become. And you still have to survive like jail culture, prison culture. You have to not get stabbed, not get raped, not all the things that go along with that. I was so sad all the time. And I didn't think there would ever be a way I could not be sad anymore. And that lasted for years. Every day I cried so much that it just hurt, like my physical cheeks hurt just from the tears. And they just wouldn't stop running all the time. Just couldn't believe I had done this to people, Not even just the people who had been killed, but my God, their families. And there's just no way to make it better, no way to take it back. So I had a friend, Dino, who I was locked up with. He'd been locked up since 1957. Still, he'll never get out. And he was just immensely helpful for me. But I remember asking him one time, how do I make amends for this thing? And Dino was like, you just do it by the way you live, by the way you live your life. And so I think that became really profound for me. I had been passively suicidal for like a couple to a few years. The yard had just closed, and I was going back in from the yard, and I couldn't even tell you the time of year, but I remember going into I was lucky. I was at a single cell unit for a while, so I had my own cell, which is actually nicer than being surrounded by bunks. But I went back to my cell, and it was sunset. You can't see out of the windows. They're just Lexan, and they're all scratched up, so you can't see anything. But I remember the light was coming through the windows, and I had this sort of epiphany where I was somehow obsessively making this whole thing about me still. And like all I could think was like, poor me, oh my gosh, I can't believe I've done this. I can't believe how I've hurt these people and their families. And how am I going to be this person who walks through the world who's done this horrific thing, this unfixable thing. And it was just this great moment of, oh man, I'm still making it all about me. I'm not even grieving them properly because I'm not giving them the space for their grief. I'm still being self-obsessed, and I remember thinking like, that dishonors them. My sorrow, so I don't want that misunderstood, because I think it's important to have sorrow and grief. But there was a point where my sorrow was doing them a disservice, did the opposite of honoring them. Then I was able to think, okay, well, what should this look like? How do I turn this into something that can be useful and helpful? And I didn't know the answer to that question. So it wasn't like, let's clean out the old barn and put on a show. But that was the moment where I think I started realizing, oh, I think I can heal, and I can get out, and I can help, and that this story doesn't have to just be a tragedy, that this can actually help other people too.
Where do you start?
That started in prison. It was Christmas, and they had asked me to join the men's club in prison. So the men's club is just like this. They take pictures during visitation of people with their families. They sell the pictures for $2, and we raise money for different things around the community or whatever else we can do. And so I was in the men's club, and it was Christmas time, and I had been called down to programs to wrap Christmas presents that somebody had gone out and bought for us to give to other people's kids, men who were incarcerated. They weren't home, so they couldn't provide presents. So we would wrap presents, and their kids would get some presents. And so I'm in programs, and I'm laughing because I'm like, I have to be now monitored in my life to manage tape and scissors. I am that dangerous to society that I can no longer have tape, But it was okay. It was Christmas time, And so I'm in programs, and I'm wrapping these presents, and I'm like, man, this is actually kind of awesome. I feel pretty good, This is what I should have been doing the whole time. This is what you're supposed to be doing with life. And then it turns out that I had that epiphany, and then they don't let you go. They're not like, okay, you get it now, you can leave. I think I still had like 6 more years to do after that. But it did sort of add to the, that's what it's about. Service to others. Maybe not everybody, but that's certainly what I'm here to do. And when I do that, I'm living my sort of right life. There's nothing that can compare to that. There's no amount of money. There's no amount of stuff that just can compare to, I can help other people. There's not much use in you just spending the rest of your life wearing a hair shirt and beating yourself with a whip. Get to work. Go do something. Find a way to help people. And so that was huge for me, because all of a sudden I went from being another person in this accident whose life had been devastated to being a person in this accident who had a purpose.
What did it look like to build a meaningful life once you were already dead, once you were already in prison?
I don't know if this is a true story, but R. Buckminster Fuller was a sort of famous inventor. And back in 1929, during the stock market crash, he had lost everything. He was a newlywed, and he had stood on the edge of a cliff, and he was like, that's it, I'm going to take my own life. He just couldn't go on like that. And there's also a great quote from the movie Heathers from the 80s, from the 1980s, that Christian Slater, was he the guy? Said this in that movie too, that was similar. He goes, now that you're dead, what do you want to do with your life? That's my Christian Slater impression. But that was Buckminster Fuller. It was like, as long as I've reached this point where I'm no longer alive, then I can do anything. If life is empty and there are no rules, then I get to decide what my life is going to be. All the norms that we grow up, all the expectations that we grow up with for ourselves, thrown out the window. And now I'm empty. I'm just a vessel for life, and I don't have any expectations or norms. I can go anywhere with that. I can do anything with that. The question becomes, how do you make that meaningful? So you can fill that bucket in a lot of different ways, but if you want to have a good life, to me, it seems the way to do that is to really embrace the joyful moments, really celebrate everything that we can. And I kind of thought of my sobriety as that of like, all right, I'm going to stay sober and I'm not going to hurt any more people. There's no way that in hell I'm going to do that anymore. So we'll just see where this thing goes. And if it reaches a point where I have to drink or get high again, I'm going to take my own life. Because I'm just not willing, because every time I've gotten high, it's gotten worse. And I don't know what's worse, but I'm not going to find out either.
Robert seems like he got everything he could out of his time in prison for the crimes he committed. Prison gave him the time and space to actually reflect on his life and what had led him to that prison cell. It aided him in getting and staying sober, at least at first. He even met his current wife through writing letters to her while he was in prison. That's a whole other podcast. But what comes after prison? Who is Robert 9 years after the worst day of his life and the last day of 6 others?
It seems to be recording.
All right. Okay. Those are some good bird sounds we have.
Yeah, actually, I've got the window open. We live across from like a farmland, so there's not much here. Is it going to be a problem with cars driving past on occasion, or should I close it?
I like a little texture to audio. Like I like hearing. I love hearing a crow. I really do. As I sit down with Robert, I don't know what to expect, but a harmonica solo definitely wasn't on my list.
Can I ask one favor real quick?
Megan, yeah.
Meg. Okay. If I can, I'd like to play harmonica for a minute. Can I give you the background story behind it?
Yeah.
All right. I've always played music, and I've always played something. I was in high school band, and then I started playing harmonica years and years ago. And when I was in active use, when I was drinking, down south, they had liquor houses. That doesn't really exist anywhere but the South anymore. So liquor houses tended to be in people's neighborhoods. They were usually like in black neighborhoods. Way back in the day when black people weren't allowed to own businesses down south, they would just start selling liquor out of their living room. And so most of the neighborhoods that I went to that were like poor neighborhoods had liquor houses. And I would go there and hang out, and you kind of had to know somebody. And we'd play music, and I'd play harmonica, right? And so what I thought was like, I was like Alan Lomax, who was the music ethnologist. I was like, so I'm studying this culture that's going away. And the truth was I was just staying drunk all the time. So I would do that, and I'd play in bars and clubs and everything else. And then when I got locked up, I was in the prison choir, which was just a blast of playing harmonica there. And I was like, I don't know. And I'm not religious. I just wanted to play music, and that was the only way I could navigate that. So when I got sober, I was like, I don't know where I'm going to play music anymore when I get out, because I don't really go to bars. It's not really my scene, and I'm not religious, so I'm not going to play at churches. So now I do a lot of public speaking at different places, and I always have this sort of captive audience. And now I'm like, well, now I can make them listen to me play harmonica. It also helps me relax a little bit. So I wanted to play harmonica for you guys, if that's all right.
In the almost 12 years since he was released from prison, Robert got married, had a daughter, became a therapist. So describe, I guess, a day in your life.
I don't do like traditional sort of therapy anymore. So a lot of my job yesterday, I still do like a lot of the same sort of stuff that you do in therapy. So I still use motivational interviewing, CBT, a lot of the other stuff, but I just don't like being in an office very much. And I don't think it's good for other people necessarily either. So a lot of the clients that I work with, we went kayaking yesterday, and this morning I met somebody and we went for a hike in the woods at 7 a.m. And then I went to the Zen Center and sat meditation for a while. I'm a long distance runner, so I try to run a few times a week. So I'll have my work day, which is just interacting with clients. I spend a lot of time talking about addiction and trying to help people through challenging moments. So I'm on my phone a lot. I like a lot of us because I'm texting clients a lot just to try to help out there. And then at the end of my day, we sit down at a table in the kitchen. We have dinner. We laugh and joke and play. And eventually my daughter goes to bed begrudgingly. She goes upstairs. My wife and I make tea, hot tea, just about every night. We sit down and watch some form of media, or we play games, or we do a puzzle, and that's kind of it. It's kind of boring, but I also think so that's what's never lost on me. I watched two guys when I was locked up get into a damn knife fight over a pillow, over who owned the pillow in this cell, and they were fighting each other. They're trying to cut each other off over it. So give me boring. I'll take boring. That's great. I love a good boring night at home.
There's nothing better.
Right. I was working with somebody recently who was in a drinking and driving accident. Somebody lost their life. So we're talking about preparing for prison. And I keep saying to them, like, honestly, some of the best people I've met in my life are in prison. Just because we're all so vulnerable and stripped down, and there's just nothing left to hide. And it'll ruin you for conversations on the outside. Most of us want to have good, big, deep connections, So I think that really helped in prison. It was like just being able to like sit down and talk with a complete stranger about where they've been, what they've been through, what happened to them. And then you hear just the most devastating stories over and over, and you realize that this is all of us. It's easy in prison because there's the very obvious, how did you get here? But when you get outside of prison, you find out that still holds true. We're all in this. We're all going through some stuff. My wife actually had gone to a talk and came back, and I was working in the yard, and she was like, I just heard this great thing. You got to hear it. And it was, we are all the victims and perpetrators of trauma. And I just loved it. I just think it captures the whole thing.
I think what people are going to wonder is how a person can carry what you carry. And your wife had such a great quote that she was able to share with you, which is, we are all victims and we are all perpetrators, but something of the magnitude that you are carrying is really rare. And to maybe people who have lost family members in a similar way, like, you are the big bad wolf.
Right, absolutely. Yeah. And there's no way to ever make that better. I was actually just in a 12-step meeting the other day talking about this. It's a very specific thing. I, like all people, like most people, I shouldn't say all, but I want to be liked. I want people to like me. And I had to come to terms with that those family members are never going to like me. It doesn't matter what I do. It doesn't matter how much joy I bring to the world or how many people I help. They have the absolute right to hate me, and I can be big enough to be hated for that. That's okay. If that helps them heal, then I owe that much. So I think about them all the time and everything all the time. I think about the people who lost their lives in every joyful moment that I have. that's something that I took, was that ability. There's no way to make that better. And I wish I could. It's just not. And I think I'll always be sad about that. I never, we just never nobody wants to hurt anybody like that.
Robert still commemorates the anniversary of the crash. Though it looks different every year, he will always carry the significance of November 1st.
I did a marathon fundraiser in prison. I almost got thrown in the hole for it because I was trying to reframe that date. And so I had been a long distance runner, and we had snuck out, me and some guys that worked in the wood shop had snuck a tape measure out, and we went out and measured out the goat track around the edge of the fence. We just measured out how many laps, so we could do the math and figure out how many laps were a mile, and we figured out it was 182 or something like that laps. So I had talked to Kara, who was outside, and she was outside at the time. We were dating at the time. And I said, I wanted to do a fundraiser for Mothers Against Drunk Driving. Just as a personal, let's do that. And so she did all the fundraising outside and was like writing family and friends, and then I'd write letters to anybody who would make a contribution. And the only day I could do it on was November 2nd. At that time, she was allowed to come to the prison and bring food, so she came on November 1st, which was a Sunday, and then I fueled up and ate everything I possibly could eat. And then Monday did the sort of marathon. And we ended up raising over like $5,200 or something, over $5,000.
You'd said that you make amends by the way you live. How do you live?
How do I live? So I try to model joy to others all the time in all things. So I had a client, a woman I'd been working with for a while. I love her dearly, but she said, some people are glass half empty and some people are glass half full. You're a glass full person. At that time, we were talking about rainy days, and I was pretty excited about a rainy day. So it took me a while to figure out, it was because on rainy days, when I was locked up, you could go out in the yard and nobody would be on the yard, so you had the yard to yourself, right? So you start learning to love rainy days. But I do think I'm pretty optimistic, and I think I really try to convey that to other people. I try to live really joyfully in everything I do. I think it's really important. I think my victims lost everything. I owe them a joyful life. Otherwise, it's just that much more wasted.
My friend Marion, I've said this on the podcast about 1 million times, but she had said to me she lost her husband, and then maybe a year or so later, she lost her son. And she said, we have a sacred responsibility to live fully in the face of loss. And the next line of the email was, it's a bitch, though.
Yeah, it's not always easy,
It's a bitch, but I do think it does feel like a sacred responsibility. Yeah. It feels like it could also be a lot of pressure.
Is it a lot of pressure? Maybe. I don't know. It feels really good to me most of the time. I feel like you said, I have this sacred responsibility, and I think not everybody is fortunate enough to wake up every day knowing what they have to do.
We have a sacred responsibility to live fully in the face of our losses. And we also have a sacred responsibility to live fully in the face of our mistakes. Our mistakes, no matter how fatal, how tragic, how irreversible those mistakes are. Because there is no math that will ever make what happened to the 6 people Robert killed okay. There's no number of hours that Robert can counsel people through addiction, no number of people he can guide through the criminal justice system, no amount of money that he can raise every November 1st for the rest of his life that will ever make what happened okay. You can't do math with human lives. Beautiful, vibrant lives that did not deserve to end on the blacktop of a highway on a cold November night. Their value and worth is immeasurable, unquantifiable. You simply can't balance an equation like that. You cannot do math with human lives. Robert knows this. He came to terms with this long ago during his time in prison. And that doesn't make his efforts to do as much good as he can with his life futile. He simply has the fortune to carry out his sacred responsibility. This has been terrible. Thanks for asking. And I'm Nora McInerny. This episode was really hard to make. There are so many layers of pain within it, and I want to give major credit to Megan Palmer for discovering this story, uncovering this story, and working tirelessly to produce a story that honors the humanity of everyone involved. Terrible Thanks for Asking is an independent podcast produced by our independent podcast company, Feelings & Co. Literally the only place you are allowed to have feelings. Please check your feelings to make sure that they include the copyright from Feelings & Co. Our team here at Feelings & Co. is myself, Marcel Malekebu, Megan Palmer, Claire McInerny, Michelle Plantan, and Grace Berry. We love our jobs here at Feelings & Co. We love being able to bring you these stories that are not just sad, stories that are not just tragic, but stories that are human and remind us all of our shared humanity. There are many ways to support this work, and one of them is something that you're already doing. You're listening. If you could share this show or this episode with a few people you think would like it, that would be amazing. And if you want to join our community of listeners, you can scoot on over to our Patreon. We have a link in our show description, but it's patreon.com/TTFA. You'll get bonus episodes. We do a weekly video for certain giving levels. We also send out very, very, very good quarterly mail. I mean, open up your mailbox and you'll be excited to get it. That kind of mail. I think that's it. God, I'm so sweaty.